Hello again, friends. I want to start our time together for this pretty challenging podcast with a history lesson. And I'm going to take us back to 1755, a long time ago, but you'll understand here in a second. And it was Lisbon, Portugal. And it was All Saints' Day, November 1st, 1755. And All Saints' Day is an important day in the Catholic calendar, and Lisbon was heavily Catholic. And so it was an important day for going to church and a time of reverence, a time of prayer. The cathedrals were full of thousands of people that morning. And then suddenly the earth began to shake. And within minutes, a massive earthquake, estimated today to have been between 8.5 and 9.0 in magnitude, reduced much of Lisbon to rubble. But the terror didn't stop there. Fires broke out across the city, and then a tsunami rolled in from the Atlantic, sweeping away entire neighborhoods. When it was over, tens of thousands of people were dead, many of them crushed while attending Mass. This disaster sent shockwaves not just throughout Earth, but throughout the soul of Europe. And what I want to talk about is the reaction to this particular terrible event and kind of compare it to what's going on today. And of course, I'm thinking about the events in Central Texas. After that tsunami happened, the church was very powerful in Europe at the time. And there are many people that blamed the people of Lisbon for what happened to them. And so what I want to do is, on this podcast, is I want to look at 4 different ways of viewing the ultimate question, which is, why does God permit bad things to happen to good people? Libraries are full of books that discuss this kind of thing. And I'll tell you right up front, I don't have any super duper answer or any kind of revelation to give to you. What I want to do is share some thoughts and reflections about this, because the 4 ways that I'm looking at this, one is through the traditional lens of the Bible and Christianity, and how we as Christians kind of explain how such terrible things can happen to people. And then I want to explain a different perspective, which is highlighted by Voltaire. And the reason I bring him up is because he's the one who reacted to the Lisbon tragedy in a unique way, which kind of started a whole different movement. So I want to look first at the Christian response, Voltaire, which represents the humanistic response. I'd like to talk briefly about the spirituality response, or people that believe in spiritualism in general, how they interpret these kind of events. And the 4th thing is just a little bit touch on the Eastern religions and how they look at this. The problem is called theodicy, right? That's the term for how does God permit bad things to happen to good people. So let me just jump back to the Lisbon earthquake. After it happened, there were a number of people who were very vocal and outspoken that it was a punishment for the sins of the people of Lisbon. There was a famous, well-known Jesuit preacher in Lisbon. His name is Gabriel Malagrida. And he said, "Learn, O Lisbon, that the destroyers of our houses, palaces, churches, and convents are your abominable sins, and not comets, stars, vapors, and exaltations." Basically saying that it had, of course, to do with their sinfulness. He also criticized Lisbon for too many Protestants coming into Lisbon, and that many people were falling away from the church. And so this is a way to bring them back. And now the reaction to this was not limited to Lisbon alone. There was another preacher in New England, in the United States. His name was Jeremiah Newland. And he wrote a poem about the destruction of Lisbon, and he was using it as, like many religious people do, using it as a reason to cause people to come back to church and be afraid of God. And the poem basically said, God, strong enough to sink the whole creation, punished New England as he had Lisbon. So the effect of that was widespread. Now, what happened was Voltaire reacted to this. Voltaire wasn't having any of it, basically. He wrote a poem. I'm not even going to try and pronounce it, but it's a poem about Lisbon. And then he had a satirical novel named Candide, and he mocked the idea that this horror could somehow be for the greater good, because a lot of the response to this was, God has a plan, and somehow this is part of God's plan, and it's for the greater good. So he challenged the logic and the heart of any theology that could claim to justify such suffering. He asked, in essence, where was your God? And how could an all-loving, all-powerful deity stand by while innocent men, women, and children were crushed beneath the falling churches. So the earthquake didn't just destroy the city of Lisbon, it cracked open a philosophical and spiritual fault line that still runs through our modern consciousness. And it raises a question that continues to haunt believers and skeptics alike, which is basically, how do we reconcile the existence of natural evil with a belief in a good and sovereign God? There's a number of things that Voltaire said. I've just got some quotes here, but he says to the people, will you say that this is the result of eternal laws directing the acts of a free God and a good God? What crime, what sin had those young hearts conceived that lie bleeding and torn on mothers' breasts? Come, philosophers, all who cry all is well, and contemplate the ruins of this world. So he was basically angry about two things. One is that people would blame this natural disasters on God, and secondly, that people would say it's all part of God's plan, all is well. So Voltaire led this humanistic, and at the time it was the time of the Enlightenment. So there are many thinkers in the Enlightenment that turned really away from believing in God and in the Bible and in the Catholic Church to using rationalistic thinking to say that this is why things happen in the earth. It has nothing to do with God. I point this out because, again, looking at it from a Christian perspective, there's a number of things that natural disasters that happened that we can look back on and say, how could God permit such things to happen? Some things that come to mind, for example, is the hurricane in Galveston, Texas, speaking of Texas, which took place on September 8th in 1900, and about 8,000 people in Texas were killed by that hurricane. And even worse, the Japan tsunami that took place, many of you remember that, in March of 2011, and all those terrible videos of the tsunami racing across Japan and killing people, that killed about 20,000 people. And then, of course, there's the Haiti earthquake, which took place in 2010. And in the Haiti earthquake, about 160,000 to 200,000 people were dead and missing. So incredible loss of life. And so one has to ask, how can that be possible? Unfortunately, similar to the way that things took place in the Lisbon earthquake, there are people who criticized the people that suffered from this. For example, the Haiti earthquake was criticized, I believe, by Pat Robertson. And it happens on both sides, right? It's not just conservatives criticizing this thing. There's liberals that are criticizing the people of Texas, in Central Texas, for what happened last week. This is not a political podcast, but I just want to point out that there are people on both sides that use these natural disasters to further their beliefs or convince people. So, Pat Robertson blamed the Haiti earthquake on their sinfulness in 2010, for which he was roundly criticized. The many people that spoke out about what's happening in Texas, they're being criticized. The people, they're conservative people. It was a conservative Camp Mystic, where the children were very Christian, praying. I saw a video of the little girls singing on a bus, still praising God after the event. But there are people who have criticized them and said they got what they deserved, kind of thing, which is very difficult for me to listen to. I have a granddaughter about the same age as those little girls in Texas, and ironically, she was at a camp by herself just a couple weeks before this event. So, although I can't pretend or try to even come to a small understanding of the pain that those parents felt, I can understand the anguish and the angst, of having your daughter or your granddaughter away and something like that happening, and you're not there to provide her any kind of comfort when she's going through that experience. So, in terms of comparing Lisbon to what's happening today, I would say that we don't understand what God's plan is, but there are people that will use it for both good and bad. I'm getting back to the framework of looking at this from four different perspectives. Again, with a Christian perspective, I have like a champion that I think of in terms of somebody that advances the thoughts of these perspectives. And my champion for the Christian perspective is C.S. Lewis. I've read a lot of his works. I respect what he has to say and think. I also have a very dear friend, personal friend, who's very well versed in the Bible. And I called and spoke to him about this. And, he doesn't have the answers about why God does this, of course, but he also referred me to some biblical verses, which I'll share with you. So, first of all, the biblical verses. My friend just pointed out to me that the Bible, doesn't say why God permits these kind of things to happen. But in the book of Job, which is supposed to be the oldest book in the Bible, as you know, Job undergoes terrible tribulations that God permits Satan to inflict upon him. And, the Satan apparently says, but this is in Job chapter 1, verse 11, but now stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. And at the end of all this, verse 22, it says, in all this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing, meaning he didn't blame God for anything that was inflicted upon him. Another verse is Luke 13, verses 1 to 5. It says, now there were some present at that time who told Jesus about the Galileans whose blood Pilate had mixed with their sacrifices. Just as a side note here, there were a number of Galileans who were killed by Pilate, and they asked Jesus if that was their fault, the fault of the people that were killed. And Jesus said, do you think that these Galileans were worse sinners than all the other Galileans because they suffered this way? I tell you, no. But unless you repent, you too will all perish. And then they also asked him about all these people that died in this tower that fell down. 18 people died. Of those 18 who died when the tower in Siloam fell on them, do you think they were more guilty than all the others living in Jerusalem? I tell you, no. But unless you repent, you too will all perish. So Jesus here was basically saying that they were not killed because of their sins or because of their sinfulness. And just a third verse that my friend pointed out to me, and it's not Jesus saying that you're not guilty for your sins, but he talks about the fig tree. And this is Luke chapter 13, verse 6 through 9. The story is about a parable where a man had a fig tree, and his foreman came to him and said, hey, we should cut this thing down. And the foreman said, let me take care of it now. Sir, leave it alone for one more year, and I'll dig around it and fertilize it. And the point was, and he said, the foreman said, if fruit grows, then it'll be fine. If not, we'll cut it down. But the point here is that it takes some smelly stuff, maybe sometimes bad stuff, to fertilize something, and then you actually see the results of it later on. And so, again, back to the mysteriousness of God's plan. Maybe we don't understand why this is happening, but later down the road, we will. My friend did relay a personal story to me that something happened to him in his life. He lost his mother at a very young age in childbirth, and he always wondered and asked God why that happened. And it was much later in his life that it became apparent to me what lessons he had to learn from that. And that's why he related me back to the fig tree. So that was a pretty a moving testimony as to why he thought that was necessary. I want to jump real quick, though, on the Christian side to C.S. Lewis. And basically, C.S. Lewis says that he has a book called The Problem of Pain, where he looks at the question of theodicy. And he said that it's important that there's a stable, law-bound world that's necessary for human freedom, moral choice, and the making of souls, even though it includes natural evil. And some of the points he makes is that a predictable world is necessary for moral choices. And this is in The Problem of Pain. He says, try to exclude the possibility of suffering, which the order of nature and the existence of free wills involve, and you will find that you've excluded life itself. So he's basically saying that you need pain to understand the option of free will. Second point was a world of consequences makes real freedom possible. Third is that God does not suspend natural law. And that fourth is we live in a law-bound world on purpose. If you're interested in C.S. Lewis, those are all points that he makes in his book, The Problem of Pain. He wrote this early on in his life. He later went on to write another book after his wife suffered and died from cancer. And again, he didn't blame God for that. But C.S. Lewis is a good reference for understanding. His point is that there are natural laws that have to be followed in order for us to have free will. So that's kind of the Christian perspective I wanted to cover as part of this brief podcast. I would also say that the point of all this, again, a point that my dear friend made clear to me, is that all you can do in these kind of situations, especially the situation in Texas, is hug and love on people, and it's love that heals. He related another experience to me, which is too personal to share, but um, love is what got him through the initial pain of losing his mother, and the comfort of relatives and friends, and all this that I'm talking about in terms of Voltaire and C.S. Lewis doesn't mean anything to people who are suffering right now because of what's happened in Texas. It's love that gets you through this. Let me talk for a second, though, about the second perspective and the third perspective, Voltaire and spirituality. So, jumping just for a second to the humanistic response to the Lisbon earthquake and the rationalistic way of looking at things, Voltaire wrote a poem called Poem on the Lisbon Disaster. And some of the quotes that he has in there, I think, are important to consider. For example, he asks, "Are you sure that this is what God wants?" And he was responding again to people, mostly clergy and religious leaders, who were blaming that disaster in Lisbon on the sinfulness of the people in Lisbon. And I think the parallel applies even to the disaster right now in Texas. People blaming it on those people kind of got what they deserved because of their religion or because of what they believe. He also criticized the concept of all will be well, which is kind of the echo of optimism of that time, that despite whatever happens, it's part of God's plan, all will be well. And Voltaire called it an illusion. So he was very critical of the all is well, optimistic part of things. He basically had a lot of moral outrage at the theological complacency going on at that time, that this is just the way it is. We don't understand it, but this is just the way it is. Voltaire questioned the divine justice and the role of God in all human suffering. Does God really do this? And he argued that we should accept the suffering, but not try and explain it away. He's sometimes called the truth teller of the Enlightenment, and basically refusing to gloss over pain. He said nature is blind and disasters happen without divine intent. And he also brings the idea that if you're seeking a divine meaning in tragedy, that may be futile or even offensive to some people. It's certainly offensive if you seek to put a divine meaning to the tragedy here in Texas. And he had a strong emotional appeal to people that felt betrayed or abandoned by religious answers. So this is the humanistic way of looking at tragedies. God is not involved in these kind of things, that there's natural law that's being followed. Now, I've read further critiques of Voltaire's position, and he did not argue that God couldn't be involved afterwards, like in terms of religion, in terms of helping people and making people feel better afterwards, and the love that's involved in helping people. But he argued that really through ridicule, that God had nothing to do with Lisbon. And I think that humanistic approach still applies today. The third perspective that I want to share, and this is going to be a little bit strange for a lot of you, has to do with a way of looking at it through a spirituality lens. And the champion of this, if you will, is not a real person. The champion is a channeled entity called Seth. Now, I've talked about this on other podcasts, but there was a lady named Jane Roberts in the 1970s, and she channeled, which means she was receiving messages from this person. And I know I've had people tell me that it was Satan or whatever, but I've read a lot of the books. I've read most of the Seth material, and I find it interesting and valid, a lot of it. So what I'm going to share with you is the perspective of this entity, Seth, talking about spirituality and why these things happen. So I'm presenting this to you as an alternative or another way of thinking, in addition to the first two that I've already shared. In the Seth teachings, mass events, whether they're natural disasters, epidemics, collective tragedies, they're not random or meaningless. Rather, they arise from what he called the collective consciousness of individuals within a community or a society. Each person contributes energetically through their beliefs, fears, desires, and intentions, and those contributions shape probabilities or frameworks for a layer of reality where mass and individual experiences are co-created. Now, that's a lot of stuff to say. Basically, it relates back to we create our own reality. We create what happens, and it's hard for me to actually wrap my head around this because it's hard to believe that those little girls would create the kind of horror that they went through. But from the perspective of we create these things, or mass consciousness creates these things, even devastating events like floods or earthquakes are not divine punishments or cruel accidents, but they're expressions of a deeper spiritual pattern that may reflect unacknowledged imbalance, fear, or transformation within a society. If you're interested in this kind of perspective, I recommend that you read some of the Seth material. It's easy to find. There's a lot of books that this lady channeled that her husband recorded. It was just kind of like a stream of consciousness where she was recording these things. Seth emphasizes that each soul chooses to enter this life with certain intentions, and sometimes those intentions include participating in mass events for purposes that transcend our individual understanding, such as collective learning, awakening, or the balancing of karmic threads. Let me just say, as an aside here, a very personal aside, I couldn't grasp or understand why we lost our son. What's it been now? 5 years ago. Couldn't understand why that happened, or why God would permit something like that to happen. And I've since come to an understanding or appreciation or realization, in a lot of ways, according to this way that Seth explains things, is that there was a reason that Matt chose to leave at that time, and it was planned. And I believe that for me personally, it was to help me with my spiritual awakening. I never would have been doing this. I never would have done a podcast or a book or any of this stuff if our son had not passed away. So I think that there was a reason for all this. And looking back now, I can understand it better. Just a lot like my friend who understands now, why he lost his mother at such an early age. So I can relate to this thing that souls choose to enter this life with certain intentions. This view can be difficult, especially when applied to the death of children, but it suggests that the soul is not a victim, even in tragedy. Rather, each soul agrees at some level to take part in the dance of earthly experience, which includes suffering and departure. And what appears as chaos from the human lens may at a higher level serve as a meaningful spiritual response. So, what you might ask, and I certainly asked, what's the difference between thinking this way and the traditional view that God works in mysterious ways, or that God has a plan and we don't understand it? I think it's a lot alike, okay? Except that this way, the spiritual way, emphasizes that it's souls that make this decision, souls that come into this world with some amount of planning and exit points, and that nothing's by accident. That perspective is not part of the Christian tradition, I don't think, and I still find that interesting and fascinating. So ultimately, Seth invites us not to explain away the pain, but to expand our view of what reality is and how we shape it. We shape reality. See ourselves as co-creators and honor both the sorrow and the sacred mystery of life. In the face of devastating loss, this perspective offers not easy answers, but a profound reframing that behind the veil of tragedy, behind this loss, may lie a deeper soul agreement, one not authored by a wrathful God or blind chance, but co-written in love, growth, and choice. And I find that very comforting. The fourth and last perspective I want to apply to this question of theodicy is Eastern philosophies, which involve karma and impermanence and detachment. And the champion, if you will, for this philosophy is Buddha. And I'm not a scholar on Eastern religions. I understand when I read and try to understand a little bit about understanding it. So this perspective I'm going to share with you is about Buddhism, Confucianism, and Taoism, and how they approach this thing of mass tragedies and loss. So with Buddha, mass tragedies are not an act of God, but they're part of samsara, which is the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. And tragedies can result from collective karma, not as a punishment, but as a balancing of energies from past lives, and that they can be a catalyst for awakening. In all of these Eastern religions, one thing they do not suffer from is a belief in evil or Satan or some kind of force that might cause this to happen. I didn't mention this in the Christian perspective, but there are people that believe that those kind of things that happen are acts of not God, but acts of Satan, evil, causing earthquakes and hurricanes and those kind of things. None of that exists in Eastern religion. So that Buddhism looks at it as as part of the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. Taoism looks at it as the flow of nature, that nature is not moral or immoral, it simply is, and that disasters are part of the Tao, the great natural order. If you try to assign blame, that disrupts the harmony of the natural order. The wise person adapts, flows with change, and accepts death as part of life's natural rhythm. One quote from the Tao is, "Life and death are one thread, the same line viewed from different sides." Now, I would say that sounds beautiful if you're sitting on the side of a hill overlooking a beautiful vista and meditating or something. I really find this hard to accept if I was one of the parents that lost my child in Texas. But that's the Taoism view of things. It would take me some time to get to the point where I could believe in that. Confucianism emphasizes compassion, ritual, and moral action. Mass tragedies are not explained theologically, but addressed ethically with responsibility and benevolence. Quote from Confucius is, "The man of virtue is not left to stand alone. He who practices it will have neighbors." There is the concept of karma in the Eastern religions, but again, as Buddhism mentioned, it's not that you're being punished for something, but it's a balancing of energies, and it can happen as a balancing between lives. All the Eastern religions basically seem to just take it and roll with it. I think it takes time to get there for sure. So that's the framework I want to share with you. A very, very difficult subject to talk about. There's no good answer that you can give anybody for why this happened. I certainly, I don't usually share my opinions on my podcast about things like religion or whatever, but I certainly believe that the people that suffered and died, especially the children, did not in any way deserve something like this. It is something that we just don't understand. And if you choose to look at it through the lens of Christianity, then it's something maybe that it's a natural law. God permits it to happen. We don't understand what the bigger plan is. If you're looking at it from a humanistic view, it's just that nature is, and God has nothing to do with it. If you look at it through the spiritualistic view, you create your own reality, and maybe the souls that suffered and died there came into this life with that part of the plan being the plan, that they would exit this life as part of that tragedy. And then, of course, the Taoist and Eastern view. In all those, no one understands why. So thank you for listening. Very difficult time. You know, I've come to understand that prayer is important. I've been told in different sessions I've had with mediums and in speaking with my son spiritually that prayer is important. So I do pray for the families and hope that they receive the love and comfort that they need and deserve in this very difficult time. And the whole point of this podcast, the whole point of my book is to offer hope. You know, right now they need love, but eventually, hopefully, they'll see that there is maybe a reason for this happening, and that their loved ones are still with them. My son is still with me. He's still someone I can reach out to, and through meditation and through mediums contact. You know, my Catholic religion doesn't really believe that, but I do. And I offer that as hope to the people who are suffering and losing their loved ones in this terrible tragedy, that they're still with you and that you can still contact them. And their suffering's over, their physical suffering's over, but spiritually they're still with you. Thank you. Look forward to talking to you again. Bye bye.